So, ang kulit na, no? But this will be, promise, the last topic that we will have for sales. So, we will talk about the bulk sales law. So, the bulk sales law is actually Act number 3952 as amended. So, anyway, the long title for this act is an act to regulate the sale, transfer, mortgage, or assignment of goods, wares, merchandise, provisions, or materials in bulk, and prescribing penalties for the violation of the provisions thereof. So that is the long title of this act. But in section 1, binigay yung short title, the bulk sales law. So yun ang kanyang short title. So anyway, the purpose of this law is to prevent the defrauding of creditors by secret sale or disposal or mortgage in bulk of all or substantially all of a merchant's stock of goods until his creditors are first paid. So remember, class, there is nothing wrong with a merchant selling all of his goods. Basta lang, ang sabi ng law, bayad dapat ang kanyang mga creditors. So yun lamang ang iniiwasan ng bulk sales law. You can sell all of your goods as long as you pay the creditors first. So the scheme of the law, remember, is to declare yung mga bulk sales as fraudulent and void. Void as to creditors of the seller. So they are void except if these sales complied with the special formalities required by law. Ano yung mga special formalities? Demanding and giving a list of creditors and also giving of actual or constructive notice to the creditors by record or otherwise, and also the making of an inventory. All of which I will discuss later on when we get to sections 3, 4, and 5. So also, the effect of this law is to create a new type or kind of fraudulent conveyance. So take note, the question here is this law constitutional? So the law is constitutional because it will not deprive yung mga persons of their property without due process, and also they will not deny the persons to the equal protection of the law. So remember also that our lawmakers cannot declare void yung mga honest and harmless transactions. But under the police power of the state, it may put reasonable restrictions on the right of ownership. Because remember, if you are the owner of a thing, you have a right to sell your property. So, remember, hindi pwedeng i-declare na void ng lawmakers yung right to sell of the owner of his property. But remember, lawmakers can impose reasonable restrictions on the right of ownership, but only to protect the public and also prevent fraud among individuals. So what else? Construction of the law, how you will interpret the law. So since this is penal in character, so remember, it should be read as a whole for the purpose of construction or interpretation, because nga it is penal in nature, may penalty, may parusa for the violation of this law. It is also in derogation of the right to alienate property without restriction, because remember, as I've said, an owner can alienate or sell his property or dispose his property without a restriction, dapat. But since here we are restricting the right to sell, the interpretation is to be strictly construed against the state and liberally in favor of the accused. So it will not be extended by construction or interpretation to situations not clearly intended thereby. So kung ano lang talaga yung nakalagay, we cannot extend the coverage of the law by implication. So, pero obviously it should be interpreted in such a way that it will cure the evil of fraudulent sales or sales which are intended to defraud creditors. So when is a sale or transfer a transfer or sale in bulk? So that is answered by section 2. Kailan ba bulk ang sale? Yun ang sinasagot dyan. So remember, any sale, transfer, or mortgage or assignment of a stock of goods, wares, merchandise, provisions, or materials not in the ordinary course of trade and the regular prosecution of the business. Kung hindi ito pangkaraniwan sa business na yan, that is a sale in bulk. What else? Any sale, transfer, mortgage of all or substantially all of the stock of goods, wares, merchandise, provisions, or materials of the business or trade. Kung binebenta mo na all or substantially all ng lahat ng stock ng business or trade. What else? The sale is also considered in bulk if it is a sale, transfer, mortgage, or assignment of all or substantially all of the fixtures and equipment used in the business of the seller, mortgagor, transferor, or assignor. So let us have an understanding class for this lecture only. Pagka sinabi ko na sale, it includes the words also transfer, mortgage, or assignment. If I say stock of goods, it will also include wares, merchandise, provisions, or materials. So if I say the term seller, it will also include mortgagor, transferor, or assignor. So para hindi mahaba, please pagbigyan nyo na ako sa part na ito. So remember, in section 2, ang sale daw ng stock of goods which is not in the ordinary course of trade is a bulk sale. Yan. What else? Any sale of all or substantially all of the stock of goods of the business or trade is a bulk sale. Also, sale of all or substantially all of the fixtures and equipment used in the business of the seller is a bulk sale. So anyway, let us say merchant. Meron siyang piggery business. So may piggery siya. Sa piggery niya, meron siyang 2,000 na lang na baboy. Meron siyang 100 na chopping tables and also 100 na freezers. So anyway, in our example, if your merchant sells 1,900 of the pigs, that is the sale of substantially all of the stock of his business. Now, if he sells 2,000 pigs, obviously that is the sale of all of the stock of goods that he has. Now, if your merchant sells yung 90 freezers and 90 chopping boards, let us just say, that is a sale of substantially all of the fixtures and equipment that he uses in his business. Now, also take note that if he sells 100 freezers and also 100 chopping boards, that is the sale of all of the fixtures and equipments of the seller or mortgagor. So, yun ang tandaan natin. That is bulk transfer. What else? Kailan naman daw ang sale ay hindi covered ng bulk sales law? But here, remember, the sale is in bulk, but it is not a bulk sale as provided for in the bulk sales law. I remember my teacher in special commercial law. Dito namin, dun sa subject namin, ito diniscuss itong bulk sales law. So anyway, ang term niya para sa bulk sales law ay busal. So, busal. So anyway, tawang-tawa siya sa sarili niyang acronym. Tawang-tawa rin kami. Because I remember this teacher, I'm sure he does not remember me at all. Mahilig siyang mag-joke, green jokes talaga. So anyway, yung mga green jokes niya, bago pa lang siya mag-punchline, tumatawa na kami. Dahil nalaman namin sa mga upper years that he really likes students na tawa ng tawa sa joke niya. Yun daw ang matataas ang grade. So, syempre, alam na namin magbabarkada. Mag-uumpisa pala siyang mag-joke, tumatawa-tawa na kami. Wala pang punchline. talagang humahagalpak na kami sa tawa. Yung mga tawa namin is very boisterous. Akala mo tawang-tawa kami. Pero sa totoo lang, scripted talaga yung tawa. Hindi naman talaga nakakatawa yung joke pero scripted na scripted. Tumatawa lang kami. Siyempre, namamag-asa kami na mataas ang aming magiging grades sa special commercial laws. But anyway, naalala ko lang bigla yung aking prof sa University of the Cordilleras where I took up law. I actually don't know what happened to him already. Probably still teaching there. He likes teaching. So anyway, same. I like teaching also. So, busal, bulk sales law. Kaya ako talagang nabitin yung busal. It's not even funny. So, nalagyan niya kasi ng green element that's why he thinks it's funny. But anyway, in the bulk sales law, remember, this is not covered by bulk sales if the sale is in the ordinary course of trade and regular prosecution of the business. Kung ang sale na yan, even if it is bulk, maraming baboy ang binenta. But if it is in the regular trade and prosecution of the business of the seller, it is not considered a bulk sale. So what else? Made by one who produces and delivers a written waiver of the provisions of the Bulk Sales Act from his creditors. So merong waiver ang mga creditors niya. So pwede siyang magbenta in bulk without violating the law. What else? If it is made by an executor, administrator, receiver, assignee in insolvency, or public officer acting under judicial process. So, a bulk sale of properties covered by the estate of a deceased person made by an executor or an administrator of the estate is not a bulk sale. So, may namatay, meron siyang iniwan na mga properties dun sa yung estate niya. Yan is administered by a person, etc. This person sells all or substantially all of the properties covered by the estate of the decedent or deceased person. Remember, this is not considered a bulk sale. So if the seller is also acting under the order of the court, like a sheriff, yan, is selling bulk items or goods, this is not covered by the bulk sales law. What else? If it refers to properties exempt from attachment or execution. So, yung mga properties na hindi pwedeng i-attach ng court or hindi pwedeng ipambayad ng utang in an execution sale, even if they are sold in bulk, they are not covered by the bulk sales law. Please take note of the definition of stock, merchandise, and fixtures. They are in your book para hindi na lang masyadong humaba yung aking lecture. And ando naman sa book ninyo. Madali lang naman yan. So anyway, let's proceed with obligations of the seller when the transaction is a bulk sale, so that yung sale will be valid. So, the first thing that the seller has to do is to deliver to the buyer in the bulk sale a sworn statement of a list of creditors. So, actually not the first thing, but among the things that the seller has to do is to deliver to the buyer a sworn statement of a list of creditors. So, may listahan siya ng creditors niya. Panotaryo niya yan, so sworn statement. Ito ang mga creditors ko, ito ang pangalan nila, ito yung mga ganyan. So, panotaryo kay attorney and give to the buyer in the bulk sale. So, before receiving from the buyer yung purchase price para dun sa bulk sale, the seller is required to give to the buyer a sworn written statement of the names, addresses of all creditors, and also amount of indebtedness due or to become due. So, Pedro, creditor, Pedro, address, San Vicente, Tarlac City, magkano utang? 200,000. So, due or to become due. So, what else? Bibigay ng seller yon kay buyer bago niya tanggapin ang bayad ni buyer na bumili dun sa bulk ng kanyang goods. What else? Also, take note, apply the purchase or mortgage money. So, kung ano yung napagbentahan, should be applied by the seller pro rata to the payment of bona fide claims of creditors as shown in the verified complaints. Bona fide yung iba. So, verified statement. So, seller should pay pro rata yung mga claims ng kanyang mga creditors na nakalista doon sa kanyang verified statement. Also, please give an inventory and written advance disclosure to creditors. So, obviously, the seller must at least 10 days before the sale of the goods make a full and detailed inventory. So, ito talaga yung unang gagawin. Kaya nga, kinorek ko yung sarili ko kanina. So, full detailed inventory showing the quantity and cost price nung goods na kanyang binebenta and to notify the creditor personally or by registered mail of the price, terms, and conditions of the sale. So, papaalam niya, ito yung bebenta ko, ito yung cost niyan, sabi niya. Tapos, ito yung terms ng sale, ito yung conditions ng sale. So, he must notify every creditor. So, para magkaroon siya para mailagay niya sa notification niya kung ano yung mga goods na kanyang ibebenta, obviously, he has to take an inventory 10 days before the sale. So, take note also that the creditors contemplated by law includes all persons who were creditors of the seller at the time of sale, although yung kanilang mga claims has not been reduced to judgment or not even due yet. So, kahit na wala pang case na final yung mga creditors na ito, or yung kanilang claim ay hindi pa due, kung basta sila ay creditor at the time of the bulk sale, they are the creditors na kailangan mong bigyan ng notice. Sila din yung mga creditors na kailangan mong ilista sa yung mahiwagang listahan. So, creditors whose claims came into existence after the bulk sale, not entitled to the benefit of the bulk sale law. What else? Ano ba ito? Waiver and estoppel of creditors. So, obviously, creditors may waive the right to the benefit of the law and stop themselves to claim that the sale is invalid because the requirements of the sale are not complied with. So, if the creditor participates in the bulk sale in any way or consents to the bulk sale in any way, syempre, hindi na niya pwedeng sabihin that the sale is invalid. And yung benefit ng bulk sales law actually is for persons who take steps to protect yung kanilang mga claims and interest. So, kung pinabayaan lang ng creditor na maibenta yung in bulk yung mga goods ng merchant/debtor or he consents to the bulk sale, syempre, hindi na siya pinaprotect ng law. Now, what if there are false statements in the schedule or list of creditors? So, if this is unknown to the buyer that there are false statements, yung buyer, ibig sabihin buyer sa bulk sale. So, if the statement is fair, so yung sa list of creditors, it is fair upon its face, and the buyer has no knowledge of incorrectness. So, and that there is nothing in the list that will put the buyer into inquiry. Bakit ganito to? Kumbaga wala siyang magiging duda. He will be protected in his purchase. So, the remedy of the creditor is not against the goods or the buyer, but to prosecute the seller criminally. Sabi ko sa inyo, may parusa to eh. So, purchaser is not liable for any incorrectness in the list being in good faith. So, nothing to put him on guard na dapat magtanong siya. So, in short, wala siyang nakikitang irregularities. What else? If there are false statement in the schedule or list of creditors with knowledge or imputed knowledge of the buyer. So remember, if the buyer has knowledge of false statements or the statement is defective on its face, so obvious naman na defective yung list, such as yung example nga dyan, it fails to give the addresses of the creditor and the buyer accepts it. Remember, the buyer will accept yung list at his peril. So in this case, because there is knowledge of any irregularity, renders the sale valid only as between the seller and the buyer but void as against creditors. So in letter B, remember, the buyer is aware of false statements, so the sale will be valid only as against buyer and seller. But remember, pagdating sa mga creditors, the sale can be considered as void. In letter C, there are names of certain creditors who are not notified and their names are omitted. So remember, as to the creditors whose names were omitted, the sale will be void as to them, whether the omission was fraudulent or not. So regardless of the good faith or bad faith of the buyer, void itong mga sale na ito. In letter D, with respect to an innocent purchaser for value from the original purchaser. So, buyer in a bulk sale sells to an innocent purchaser. So, remember, yung creditor of the seller who fails, yung seller here failed to comply with the requirements of the bulk sales law. Yung mga creditor nun does not have a right to pursue the property in the hands of an innocent purchaser for value from the original purchaser. So, seller sells in a bulk sale to a buyer. The buyer sells to an innocent person. Yung mga creditors ni seller, buyer from buyer. Yung mga creditors ni seller, ito sila banda. Creditors ni seller, they have no right to file any action against the innocent purchaser for value from the original purchaser. Of course, subject to qualifications if the circumstances are such as to bind the subsequent purchaser with constructive notice. So if there is constructive notice to the purchaser from the original purchaser, the sale can be considered also as fraudulent, and yung purchaser from the original purchaser will be liable to the creditors of the original seller. So, dahil may notice yung purchaser from the purchaser or yung subsequent purchaser, so it removes yung kanyang good faith. So, alam niya that the sale is in violation of the bulk sales law. So, nawawala yung kanyang pagka-innocent. Yan. So, anyway, what is the effect of the sale in violation of the bulk sales law? The sale is void. So, usually, a sale in fraud of creditors are rescissible contracts. Pinag-aralan na natin yan. Remember, pwede ka pang, if you are the creditor, you can file a rescissory action or yung action poliana to rescind this contract. Remember, rescissible contracts are valid contracts but are subject to rescission. But remember, sales in fraud of creditors which are bulk sales are void. So yun ang isang pagkakaiba pagdating sa bulk sale. Ordinary sale in fraud of creditors, rescissible. Bulk sale in fraud of creditors, obviously, is void sale. So, as between the parties, remember, the bulk sale does not in any way affect the validity of transfer. So, between the merchant/seller and the buyer, the sale is valid. So, a sale not in compliance with the bulk sales law is valid against all persons. Lahat naman valid except yung mga creditors ng seller. Now, in letter C, as against the creditor, yung purchaser, buyer in violation of the law will acquire no right in the property purchased. Yun nga, as against the creditors of the seller. So, yung purchaser is merely a trustee or receiver for the benefit of all the creditors of the seller. So, yung subject matter of the sale, as far as the creditors are concerned, are still owned by the seller. And yung mga properties ng seller na yan na nasa kamay ng buyer from the bulk sale can be subjected to the satisfaction of the liabilities of the seller against the creditors. So, yung mga creditors, pwede pa rin nilang kunin yung mga properties nitong seller na nasa kamay ng buyer who buys in a bulk sale which violates the bulk sales law. So, pwede nilang ma-attach, ma-execute yung mga properties na yan later if the creditors nag-file ng action against the seller/debtor. Yung mga goods can be used to pay for the liability of the debtors to the creditors in an execution sale. So, take note also that the buyer shall be liable for goods sold to an innocent purchaser for value. So, what else? Buyer can require the seller to return the amount paid by him. So, syempre, the seller violated the bulk sales law. Tapos, yung mga properties na kay buyer, pwedeng makuha ng mga creditors. So, if the buyer is evicted from the possession of yung goods na binili niya from the seller in the bulk sale or merchant in the bulk sale, he can ask for a return of his money. So, remedies which are available to the creditor. So, remember, if the seller does not comply with the provisions of the bulk sales law, remember, yung buyer, as ordinarily, cannot be made personally liable to the creditors. Meaning, hindi pwedeng yung mga creditors, idemanda na lamang nila yung purchaser in the bulk sale para sa collection ng kanilang mga credit. But remember, the proper action is against the goods. So, subject them to the payment of the debt, such as in case of execution, attachment, or garnishment, or by a proceeding in equity. Yung mga creditors, wag nilang idemanda yung purchaser para makakolekta dun sa kanilang mga credit. Ang gawin nila, habulin nila yung goods na nasa kamay ng purchaser. Remember, as to the creditors, the sale is void. But syempre, buyer and seller, the sale is considered valid. Pero dahil nga, as to the creditors, the sale is considered void, they can execute upon the goods after judgment has been rendered in their favor para dun sa kanilang final na action for collection against the seller. So, what else? Section 6 and 7. These are the acts punishable by law. So, also include Section 3 here. Knowingly or willfully making or delivering a statement required by the act. So, in Section 3, di ba, nag-require siya ng list. But the list does not include the names of all the creditors of the seller with the correct amount due and or to become due, and which contains any false or untrue statements. So, that is an act punishable. What else? Transferring title to any stock of goods without sold in bulk without consideration or for a nominal consideration only. So, if the buyer does not pay for the goods that were transferred to him, or he pays minimal or nominal amount for it, that is in violation of the bulk sales law. If it appears to be fraudulent, remember, this is punishable. What else? Sworn statement must be registered. So, the list must be registered with the Department of Trade and Industry. Non-compliance with this requirement would not seem to affect the validity of the transfer. So, if you do not register it, the transfer will not be affected, the validity of the transfer, nor will it be considered a violation of the bulk sales law and subject yung mga parties to or the seller to a criminal penalty. So, even if not registered yung list, valid transfer not subject to criminal liability. administration by the Secretary of the Provisions of Law under Section 10. The bulk sales law, yung mga provisions niya will be administered by the Secretary of the Department of Trade and Industry, and he will prescribe and adopt from time to time such rules and regulations as may be necessary for the proper and efficient enforcement of the provisions of the bulk sales law. Penalties for the violation of this law under Section 11. Conviction. Upon conviction shall be punished by imprisonment of not less than 6 months nor more than 5 years. Medyo mahabang bakasyon ito. So, not less than 6 months nor more than 5 years. Or a fine in a sum not exceeding 5,000 pesos. So, or both. Such imprisonment and fine at the discretion of the court. So, effective under Section 12, December 1, 1972. So, bagong-bago. Pero again, promise class, hindi pa ako pinanganak ng time na ito. So, anyway, that is it really for sales. Next lecture will be about pledge. So, please stand by for that. Thank you, class. And again, I hope you have a very great day. So anyway, thank you, class.